You're already starting to see this phenomenon where the stock market booms and like people's employment is disappearing. And all of these things go like demand for humans, like literally like
lawyers, accountants, HR
lawyers.
managers.
I'm not like my lawyers, they're on their way out. So you see this like massive demand destruction. You see a relatively small number of people getting extremely filthy rich by being on the producing side of this. You know what is really wrong? Is a concept that actually should not exist and makes no sense. I'll give you 2 words. Passive investing. Actually, I have no alpha. I'm not adding any information to this information market, but there is something else called beta, right? And what is beta? Beta is the government printing money. If you have a hard money financial system, you will not have beta. Both foreign trade and migration is actually a little taste of the future, because when you're importing basically slave labor, you're treating them like Optimus robots. There's a third approach, which is the default approach, which is just everything turns into the third world. We've turned, America and Europe into basically Argentina with nukes. You're in a situation where suddenly America is a third world country. Your children will be like digging rare earths out of a hill with their bare hands like Congolese miners.
Curtis, good to see you here in London.
Pleasure. It's always good to be here, even though it's cold and nasty in this city. But
always is.
Well, at least the Thames isn't frozen. So
not yet, but it may freeze. The country may freeze over at some point, politically anyway.
Yeah.
Look, we're in very strange times. As you know, the global debt, sovereign debt, is at all-time high. It's a wall of debt that we worry can't be paid off. And that's happening at a time where I think we're right in an AI acceleration phase, which is changing a lot of jobs, a lot of industries. There's a lot of fear with that. It feels like governments are even more behind the curve than ever, and companies are leading the charge. Is this the moment where we realize democracy just does not work?
Well, there's a lot of ruin in a nation, and also there's a lot of ruin in a financial system. Let me say something provocative about finance, though, which is actually a truism that you will learn in any kind of accounting school, which is that liabilities consist of actually 2 things. They consist of debt and they consist of equity. And so when you say basically the debt can't be paid off, this is, of course, true in a sense, but really, when the stock market goes up, that's also red ink. And understanding that when the stock market goes up, that's also red ink, because it's also a liability. It's also essentially, it's inflation, right? You're literally increasing the quantity of dollar or pound denominated assets. And it is the quantity of financial assets denominated in pounds or pounds and dollars that define spending power. And so actually what you're seeing when the stock market goes up, you don't think of that as being like the government printing money and giving it to rich people. But in fact, in ways that are like clearer than you can, it is the government printing money and giving it to rich people. It's actually, the real graph to watch is not the graph of debt. If you go, or at least for America, I think it's one of the Z1 statistics. It's simply personal net worth. And personal net worth is spending power in dollars. And when personal net worth does not, when the increase in this curve, which goes steadily up despite our assets not particularly being worth much more, except in the case of maybe an AI factory, when that curve goes upward and to the right, there's 2 possibilities. There's one, that number will basically be the same as the inflation number, which is, of course, the consumer is price inflation, as opposed to, which is downstream, obviously, of monetary inflation. But when you're inflating total personal net worth, and that is not driving inflation, it's because you're basically giving all the money to the rich people. So it kind of like sucks in either perspective. On the other hand, it's been sucky for quite some time. And I can tell you, like, this AI really works, and I use it professionally, like, not in my writing, of course, but it's not this, it's that, right?
Yeah, yeah, I learned that early on.
Let's delve into this, right? Quietly, right? And it's but one of the another sort of grim doomer thought about the state of our financial and political systems is you're like, if these systems worked well, they wouldn't constantly need technological advances to bail us out. We should be able to have as nice a place as Edwardian London with Edwardian technology. And in fact, if our technology in the last 100 years had not improved, but our systems of government and finance had gone in the same direction they have gone, things would be absolutely terrible.
Well, with technology and innovations, things should get cheaper, faster, and better. And if you're wealthy, they probably have.
Yes, they have definitely gotten cheaper, faster, and better. But to equate, those are hedonic changes, and to equate those with financial changes is like really sort of strange and wrong. So if you look at the way CPI is calculated, for example, by the Labor Department, this is sort of one of the triumphs of 21st century statistics. And when you're basically doing statistics and you see two groups of numbers that are different, and you're like, I'm going to average these groups of numbers and report them as a single thing, you're really in a very strange place. And when you look at basically CPI metrics as a basket of products in the US, first of all, they're all sort of rated hedonically. So what you're actually, you see this K-shaped curve. And the top of the K is basically things that are human services like medical bills or, college costs or whatever. And those just go straight up at like 8 or 9 or 10% a year. Obamacare has done insane things with this. And then you have the figure for the cost of a car. Now, the cost of a car has not decreased, but the cars have more horsepower. They have better airbags. And so according to the way we measure these things, this is deflation. What you're actually saying is that basically when technology improves, the government should be able to steal that dividend from you.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing by mixing these numbers together. You're basically saying, well, we diluted the financial system by like 10% a year. So it's like if you expanded the equity of a company, right? And you took 10% off. Well, you have the same number of shares. We didn't take any shares from you. Yeah, there's 1.1 million now rather than 1 million shares, but we didn't take anything from you, right? And it's like, furthermore, the stock price went up. So you actually made money. And it's like, no, actually, that doesn't change the fact that you're skimming, right? And it's sort of the same when you basically say, well, we have this expanding financial universe, right? And the expansion in it doesn't, when real estate values go up, it doesn't mean your house got better, right? That is clearly a monetary phenomenon. And then you say, well, but technology got better, so we stole a bunch of money from you, but your car got faster. That is 20th century macroeconomics, right? So we stole a bunch of money from you, but your car got faster. Also, we inflated the financial system. So as long as you want to gamble with your savings, you can put them in an index fund and they will earn more money than interest because that's how inflation works. If it was just interest then, right? And so it's this whole insane system of robbing Peter to pay Paul through the monetary system in all of the financial system in all of these really strange ways, right? And even measuring what this system is doing is hard. Like probably most, economists would be like personal net worth. That's a weird way to measure inflation. I'm like, inflation is an increase in purchasing power, and that's your purchasing power. And it doesn't really matter if your purchasing power is in a suitcase full of bills or, a mutual fund, right? Or a house, right? It's still your purchasing power, right? And so the whole economy depends on that number going up. And if the number starts to be flat, there's a huge gap. Like when you basically stop borrowing and stop inflating. And again, when you sort of think of borrowing and inflating asset prices as fundamentally the same thing in the way that debt and equity are fundamentally the same thing. They're both liabilities. And when you also see government debt, which is really just a form of equity, right? You're just like, wow, this is just this giant money losing system. And this giant money losing system can sort of continue because the value of these polities is so great. But
it's okay if you're in the club, though.
It's okay if you're in the club because you're actually in the money gaining part. It's really very much third world economics. And it's absolutely the thing that has destroyed all of these industries, right? And sovereign, even the sort of the sovereign powers of what remains of English sovereignty have allowed it to like deindustrialize it's just a simple national choice. If you want to overvalue your currency, people have more nice stuff to spend and you destroy your industries. You want to go in the other direction, right? Then people have less nice stuff and you build huge quantities of industries. This is why China undervalues its currency. For China Inc., undervaluing their currency is like cutting your prices, right? It's just like a discount store that is basically, your goods from China Inc. cost less if you basically pull the currency down. That's why they have currency controls. That's why they manipulate the currency. That's why there's not a free market in the yuan, right? And so you're actually like, it just, the whole system of saying, oh, our GDP is going up because people have more stuff. Oh, now your cars are going to be made in China. That's fine, right? Because we can print more money and China is willing to basically accept, like, it's very much worth it to them to send consumer goods here, in exchange for pieces of green paper.
But eventually this will collapse.
It's like...
Or it's arguably collapsing slowly around us.
I think that there's too much, like, when I hear people saying that, my worry is that there's something optimistic in the human heart, and that leads to something called just world fallacy. And so actually, in a way, it's like, yeah, I think God would definitely want it to collapse. I think when you look at the system, on the other hand, let's not be too quick to know what God wants. Maybe God wants it to continue in order to punish us, right? Maybe we deserve it, right? And
but there are certain signals that stand out for me. So the fast changing political environment, say here in the UK, we used to have two lead parties and occasionally a coalition. They're both at existential risk now of not even existing as parties. We have brand new parties that are becoming legitimate very quickly. A fast-paced growth of the Greens.
Strange. Pieces of ice are breaking in strange ways because you have this, like, yes. So the sort of the things that are in kind of tension with the 21st century. We have a political system, or at least an electoral system, because its, of course, relationship to the actual government is increasingly attenuated. But we have an electoral system which is very much based on 20th century broadcast media. And so you have this thing where it's basically like, having been in the UK for 21 hours or whatever, I've also already heard many discussions between supporters of England's two great parties, of course, the left-wing party of Reform and the right-wing party of Restore, right? Like this is this is the Overton window which I inhabit when I come here, right? And you are doubtless adept enough in this situation that you personally could make the Reform case against Restore and the Restore case against Reform, whichever of these forces that you believe in. But, Reform is this sort of, it's a kind of transitional thing in a way, because it's kind of, it's daring to sort of stir the surface of the sort of broadcast media political game. Of course, Farage has been playing that game with various levels of success for quite some time. He's quite a canny operator in that game. He's quite a good player. But it's a game in which, like, absolute sincerity is not exactly the currency of the realm. It's a game where basically people in that world expect, a lot of theatrical. They don't expect. They don't even know it exists. It's sort of like if you go farther back in the past, the reality and the audience become increasingly attenuated. So, of course, most Americans and probably most Brits did not know at the time that Franklin Roosevelt used a wheelchair.
I didn't know that.
He was able to conceal that from the public, right? And very aggressively. Yes, people knew he was a polio survivor, but he always stood in front of the cameras. So, this difference between on-camera world and off-camera world, really quite considerable at that time. And, FDR using a wheelchair in terms of like historical importance is very much the least of it, right? And you see that gap sort of narrowing in a way. It's like one of the things that people don't, I think, remark on often enough about Trump and Vance as politicians is they are absolutely the same person off camera as on camera, right? And moreover, they don't seem, I've never met Trump, but they don't seem terribly masked in that context either. And I would say I did meet Farage once a long time ago. He's charming on camera. He's charming off camera.
But he's very different off camera. That's one of the things I notice. I think on camera he's Farage and off camera he's Nigel. And he's a lot more measured, considerate, slower speaking. It's almost like...
Nigel is more measured.
Yes. Has a great understanding of history, incentives. And then when he's on camera, this character appears.
Yeah.
Whereas Rupert Lowe is the same on camera and off camera.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I met Nigel like 10 years ago or so, I was impressed by him. I was like, expected this glad-handing chap with a beard, not someone who could talk intelligently about not only Powell, but even Pierre Poujade, right? It's like, imagine an American politician who knows who Pierre Poujade is. I mentioned this because Poujadism was sort of French 1950s populism, basically. So yeah, he's an Oxbridge graduate, he's not just having the piss, right? But his in the market for absolute sincerity that is created by the world of social media, he's really at a disadvantage relative to Lowe. Because I've never seen Lowe off camera. You probably have.
He was here a few days ago.
And I would imagine he is the same person off camera as on camera.
The same person on camera, off camera, and how he tweets. He is just...
Yeah.
He's the real deal. What you see is what you get. And I think there is a demand for sincerity now.
There's a demand for both sincerity and irony, actually, because the sincerity has to be... There can't be... It's not a kind of unself-aware sincerity. The 21st century sincerity always has to have this slight, there's nothing without a slight quality of irony. Like there's nothing that's sort of not aware of itself in that way. Like if you go and watch like propaganda from 100 years ago or political propaganda from 100 years ago, many things will strike you, but one of the two things will strike you is that the intellectual level is much lower and there is no irony, none, right? And that only starts creeping into politics in like the late 20th century, really. And now, of course, we live in one of the most ironic ages in history, right? Probably there's a lot of like late Roman Empire vibes kind of in that, also very ironic, very, very materialistic period.
But it also feels like a period of great civilizational shift we're going through. I sense it in that we're going through one of the big revolutions, which is AI, which is going to change a lot of things. We do have, this debt bubble does exist, depending how you define it. And there is a big geopolitical shift that's happening now. And all these forces are happening at the same time. And what it feels like to me is that the old democratic system that we've been running, certainly for the last maybe 100 years, now doesn't work because we're able to see it for what it is, see its mistakes, and just reject it.
Well, let's talk about the financial side first in a way, because really... when you're looking at this huge paper bubble, just saying paper to include both debt and equity, you're basically seeing something that, when a, can I use the word shitcoin on this show?
Oh, you can use way worse than that.
When a shitcoin basically is like constantly expanding its like fully diluted value by minting new coins, you're basically like, well, actually the proper way to account for this is fractional accounting, like what percentage of the whole do I hold? And it seems that is going down constantly due to your, basically rug pull minting activities, right? When you have a whole economy that is doing this, it basically creates a pressure for exits. It creates what von Mises called the flight to real value. And then the problem with the flight to real value is you're like, oh, well, tulips have real value, so we're going to bid up like the tulips, right? And then tulips cannot sustain overvaluation because they're freaking plants, man, and anyone can mint tulips, right? Although actually, the thing about the tulips that most people don't understand about the tulip bubble is that one of the reasons there was a tulip bubble is that the exotic tulip bulbs did not breed true because they were not just genetic. They were like, there was also like something that infected the tulip that made it like variegated in various ways. And so there was like real like rarity in like a Semper Augustus tulip or whatever, but it still ultimately did not work. And so you have this kind of coordination problem of like finding the exit and like what is the exit. And so, for example, like the crypto aside, certainly I remember, I had I had pre-IPO shares in like a .com company in like 2000, right? Not a whole lot. And I remember it's one of these moments where you have like a thought, which is like the right thought, and then you dismiss it immediately from your mind. And my right thought was I should move all of this money as far from tech as possible. And then I was like, well, what's farthest from tech that's possible? I don't know, gold, right? And I look at gold, and gold is in what I believe in the UK you call the brown bottom, where Gordon Brown sold off the nation's gold reserve for $250 an ounce, right?
Please don't.
Does it hurt? Does it hurt when I say these things?
I mean, it doesn't hurt me personally, but I think it hurts the country.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
It was a sad move, right? And for all I know, the gold in Fort Knox is still there, right? And so you're basically saying like, when you're sort of looking for an exit, it's what game theorists call a coordination problem, because you basically don't want to go into something that's going to be like overvalued, like the tulip bulbs, where you can't overvalue this and then people are like, wow, we could grow tulips too, right? And you have to sort of pick the same thing as other people. And when you go into gold, like the gold market is a weird place, man. There's like gold derivatives up the wazoo, and like, as somebody naked short gold out there, I don't know, maybe not. What is the BIS doing? You're familiar with the BIS, right? There's like weird ancient 100-year-old skullduggery. It's not even post-World War II skullduggery. It's post-World War I skullduggery. That's like the BIS, right? So the thing is that you're going, when that exit route of basically saying, well, all this thing is diluting, because that's what you're doing when you expand the paper. You're diluting, right? Now maybe you're creating new value with your AI factories or whatever that matches the dilution in some places. Maybe you're not, right? So you're like, what is the thing that can't be diluted? And then you're like, all right, gold, or maybe Bitcoin, and they're basically two rather somewhat medium-term arguments against each of these. The argument against Bitcoin is no one is quite sure what to do with the quantum problem, because it is starting to look, although I'm very skeptical of scientists of all kinds, basically, but they seem to think that they're actually making progress on quantum computing. Now this is a problem that you must have been.
Yeah, but
Nick Carter
it's
talks
solvable.
It's solvable. It's solvable. It's solvable. And so, that's basically, somebody will steal Satoshi's keys, which are all unshielded, basically, and whatever. And then the case against gold, you'll love this, is scalable chrysopia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Somebody published a paper
Is
recently.
this synthetically creating gold?
Synthetically creating gold, which people have long known is like theoretically possible, but yeah, you get 6 atoms. Well, somebody published this design for basically a fusion tokamak wrapped in a bath of mercury. And as the neutrons filter out from the fusion tokamak, it gets into the mercury, and they're like, this could maybe be profitable. Now, these are calculations made by scientists, so it's probably an order of magnitude off. But they're like, we can make this profitable for $5,000 an ounce,
Well,
which is precisely the price of gold at the moment.
And they've done it for diamonds now.
Yeah, now diamonds, that's atomic structure and not, this is actual transmutation, right? But, the point is that there are a lot of, when you're basically playing this game of looking for an exit, you have a game from the dilution, from the debt bubble, from the paper bubble, you have this fundamental problem of game theory, which is that like everyone else is also looking for the exit. And like, therefore, when you're predicting what these exits will do, you have to basically make this reflexive calculation where you're like, what are other people going to do? So, for example, in the gold market, basically, you have these giant players in which are central banks, which could buy a lot of gold because the percentage of the reserves in gold is fairly small. So if you look at basically Chinese gold holding, one of the reasons why the gold market has gone a little crazy over the last year is that, it looks like this, right? It's a hockey stick in terms of, basically Chinese gold reserves, because the Chinese are like, why do we have these green pieces of paper? Like, we don't even like these people, right? They're sitting and looking at the dead presidents, right? So they're like, who is Andrew Jackson?
Yeah.
Oh, Andrew Jackson. Oh, right. What are you going to do with your green paper, right? So what you're seeing there, here's an example of the way those things could converge. Now, I'm not making policy I have no particular case for the Chinese Communist Party. But the thing is, if the Chinese Communist Party was to say, well, we're this export-oriented nation and we're doing that to like impoverish our people, but like what we really need is to keep our people employed because, otherwise they get riot and they get rowdy.
We have to shoot them.
We have to shoot them, right? And actually, reports from China are now like, China is also having problems just because I think of the efficiency of technology. They're having problems with their full employment. They have like weird financial structures, but they have a trade surplus, which is a trade surplus for a country is like running a profit for a firm. If you're profitable, like you could be a mess, but you're still profitable. So let's say China tomorrow is like, all right, we, every time we get $1 in surplus trade, we're going to put it into gold. We are going to basically be remorselessly buying $1.5 trillion, which is, I think, roughly China's trade. It's $1 trillion or so trade surplus. We're going to be buying $1 trillion of gold every year. You can imagine what would happen if they were buying $1 trillion of Bitcoin every year, right? And even more than that, they could say, well, this gold actually belongs to the Chinese people, and we are going to basically go back on the gold standard for China because we have basically done busting out the planet. Because what China has been doing is like a Sopranos bust out of the planet. All right, we're done busting out the planet. We've turned, America and Europe into basically Argentina with nukes, right? The last titans of like ASML or whatever will finally fall, and the Chinese will just be better at everything. They're landing rockets on their tails now. They're chasing SpaceX, they're chasing Tesla, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a remorseless 996, if you've heard the term, competitor. So they're like, all right, we're done with this. All right, now, hey, rest of the world, like Argentina with nukes, right? You want anything from us? I don't know. You must have some gold somewhere. Hey, Americans, you got some gold somewhere. Why don't you burn through Fort Knox, maintaining your standard of living for the next 5 years? And when you're done with that, maybe you can think of something else. I don't know. You can mine, you could, right? And you're in a situation where suddenly America is a third world country, right? And has basically nothing to offer China in much the same way that the Congo has nothing to offer China except from like raw materials. So your children will be like digging rare earths out of a hill with their bare hands, like Congolese miners or something, right? Meanwhile, the Chinese people basically having reaped the rewards of becoming the world's leading industrial country now have like suddenly all their money is turned into gold. Their purchasing power, they've basically replaced foreign purchasing power for running their big economy with domestic purchasing power. They've lost their export market because they basically, let their currency float back up. In fact, and they sort of did the Bitcoin thing in my hypothetical thing with gold, so that like everybody in China is like crypto rich, but in gold, right? And they're like, spending like crazy, and the factories are buzzing. And like here in the West, we're like, does anyone have an egg? And an egg can be a real luxury in certain situations, right? And so that's a situation of sort of crushing dominance in a way for China. Now, it is true that our frontier AI models are 6 months ahead of theirs, or open source models or something, maybe 7 or 8 months even. That's not a huge amount of time. And the possibility that these things will plateau is very much there. And one of the effects of people are like, oh, this is an economic transformation that will, bring only good things to the world. I'm like, well, you could imagine it being kind of on the scale of the Industrial Revolution. Like nobody in my company, like OpenAI has already prohibited their developers from coding. People don't code there anymore. Mm-hmm. And I'm basically in the process of doing the same thing at my company, right? And so I'm just like, no, this is ridiculous. Like, you can't do this by hand anymore, right? And so it is an Industrial Revolution-like effect. Fortunately or unfortunately, one of the things that the Industrial Revolution did was destroy an enormous number of livelihoods, like very, very early. I don't know if you know the James Goldsmith poem, The Deserted Village.
No, I don't.
It's a classic late 18th century poem about the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution in England. And he's just like, this is just completely hollowed out the countryside. What the hell, right? There used to be a village blacksmith, and now everything is made in Sheffield. Nothing's made in Sheffield. But now it used to be, right? There's still a Sheffield Wednesday. I don't know why there's a Sheffield Wednesday. I'm an American. I can't understand why there's a Sheffield Wednesday. None of our sports teams is named for the days of the week, but we won't go there, right?
And they're pretty much bankrupt.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Right. And my son is a Premier League fan, and it's interesting to see the difference in the Premier League demographic, on the stands, in the streets, on the field. But
Sheffield Wednesday have minus points.
Wait, what?
Yeah, they have minus points.
How is that possible?
Kurt, can you have a look up Sheffield Wednesday's points for me? So because we have penalties for if you go bankrupt or if you have financial issues. So there's different penalties. Some of them are they take away points off you.
Right.
And so I think I don't know if they started the season early on, maybe minus 12 points. And so I think they're still on. Are they still on minus points?
Minus 10.
They're minus 10 points.
And how many divisions down can they go? Can they go to like semi-pro?
No, they'll only drop one, so they'll drop down into the League One next year, but they're on minus points. So
got it.
But yeah, look, it's
League One, then the Championship, then the Premier, right? Am I wrong?
So this AI thing, I was thinking about this morning. I was watching an interview with Elon Musk, and he was talking about the office. And office-based jobs are just going to go. Screen-based jobs are going to go because we essentially replace manual jobs with screen jobs, and people sat there doing tasks in front of screens. But you can give AI control to your screen. It can do it better than you, faster than you, 24 hours a day for like $20.
There's two sort of courses where that goes in. And one of them, the optimistic one, which I'm sure Elon will give you, is the Jevons paradox one, where you're like, well, it became much cheaper to create this stuff, so we need much more of it. And I'm like, just taking my own company as an example, I'm just like, wow, we can deliver a lot more software much faster. That's true. And we don't need to fire anyone. We don't need to fire anyone because everyone we have is capable of being an architect as well as an engineer. And now they're only architects. There are no more engineers. They're only architects. And if you can't architect, you're done, right? You're John Henry competing with a locomotive. Now, are we still going to need architects? Certainly we still need them now. Like, definitely, like, I need to hold Claude's hand, like, because I'm doing something interesting, which it hasn't really seen before. So I have to hold his hand, right? It's still like I'm solving like problems that would have been like week-long, like, divagations in the development phase, and they just like disappear in 2 hours, right? So, and then I'm like, all right, so maybe we'll have much more software, but you know what? What also AI is good at, although it's still improving at this, really, is graphic design. Is graphic design getting in, exhibit the Jevons paradox? Are we going to get much more graphic design because graphic design gets much easier? No, the product managers are just going to tell AI to do it. Actually, if you're a graphic designer, you're fucked, right? If you're a translator, you're fucked, right? And so there's basically large classes of, we, in the English language at least, we use professional words to designate who we are. I'm an African American, but I'm also a graphic designer. I'm actually neither. But like although, I can do decent design and I can actually speak some pretty good Ebonics, but we won't do that here. But I'm neither of these, things, but many people are like, I'm a graphic designer. Sorry, like happened to the cobblers first, and like actually, so what you're seeing with AI is you're seeing something that's, I think, I have seen other people making this, comparison. It's kind of obvious, but it's not enough talked about, which is the relationship between technology and the resource curse. If you know the resource curse.
I don't.
It's the economic phenomenon where a country strikes oil and everything in the country gets worse. Even though, like Venezuela, for example, is the worst country in, just structurally in South America, even though it's the only one with really substantial amounts of oil. This is not a coincidence. This is seen all over the globe. The problem is that essentially it's, and the mediating factor is something called Dutch disease. What Dutch disease means is that you have this source of money, and that makes basically anything like, you have this pile of money, it becomes easier to basically buy things overseas than buy, with the pile of money, than like to make them yourself. Like, do they make handbags in Saudi Arabia? I don't think so. Right. And so you basically get this like destruction because the whole GDP of the country can be produced by like 6 guys. Right. And so you get this destruction of labor demand. And the result is that very large numbers of people are forced to essentially turn to the political means of survival rather than the economic means, which means there's nothing that they can do that is helpful enough to their fellow human beings that those fellow human beings will feed them. And so they actually need to use their political power to get money. And that basically is what turns you into Venezuela. And so in a world where you're already starting to see this, like people trained to be software engineers, well, you could be an architect, right? The thing is, the best way to be an architect is to have written a lot of code for 10 years and nobody's writing any code anymore. So maybe the architects will just get, gray hair and we'll teach people how to, people are software managers who don't know how to code, right? And so, right. And all of these things go like demand for humans, like literally like,
lawyers, accountants, HR
lawyers.
managers.
I'm not like my lawyer is, they're on their way out, right?
Yeah.
And like the like mine specifically, I'm gonna like take Claude to my family court case, right? And so you see this like massive demand destruction. You see a relatively small number of people getting extremely filthy rich by being on the producing side of this. You do see a lot of some like sort of conventional labor going into building data centers and so forth. But you're already starting to see this phenomenon where the stock market booms and like people's employment is disappearing, right? And there are just many, many, many professions. There are some pieces of inefficiency in the market where you have a bullshit job for basically regulatory reasons or other things. Those bullshit jobs, because they're held up by power, are going to stay, right? But they're going to become even more sort of obviously unnecessary. And whether those brittle structures can be broken is unclear. But in terms of actually needing people, I mean, this is one of the things we found in COVID that was so crazy about COVID in 2020 was before the Fed got involved, we were going to have cannibalism in the streets. And once the Fed got involved, they're just like, it's no problem, everyone. Nobody has to work. We don't actually need to work in this country. The only people who need to work are like the food delivery guys. They can wear masks and bring us food, and the rest of us will just print money.
Yeah.
And they just printed money, and the stock market, which should go on like, right? And
but that can't last forever. You can do it temporarily.
The thing is that just world fallacy always plays a factor there. And like, and so when your intuition is that can't last forever, it's important to separate that intuition from actual mechanisms in a way. And so, for example, when you talk about people exiting the financial system, you basically see a situation where people stop saving in the currency or in the standard currency, because saving in a different currency, despite the lack of actual financial markets in this currency, will do better. And so that's especially true in the sort of the rush to an exit. This is the kind of traditional collapse structure of paper money. You basically get in like the Soviet Union, for example, which really abused, their paper money. You develop like this concept of hard currency versus soft currency. And in like 20th century, really mismanaged economic third world or communist countries, hard currency meant the dollar or gold, right? And which were sort of considered of equivalent hardness because they were of comparable hardness, right? And so you have to, when you imagine basically sort of whole economies fleeing to basically a parallel financial system that's somewhat ahead of where we are, where you basically say, and there are all these kind of structural restrictions to it, like it used to be very hard to buy Bitcoin. You had to go to Mount Gox, right? You should have gone to Mount Gox, but, some did and some didn't. And then, later on you had to use Coinbase, and now it's like these things are getting closer and closer to just being, calling your bank and saying, I'd like to basically have my savings account in Bitcoin or in gold, rather Zcash, rather than pounds, or, there's no technical reason why, for example, a bank in the UK can't offer dollar savings accounts, right? All these currencies are kind of locked together, so it doesn't really matter that much, but they could. In Argentina for a while, they were offering, before the Corralito, they were offering dollar accounts to Argentinians, which were not, however, backed by actual dollars.
They didn't switch.
They learned some lessons there.
Yeah.
And I think in Argentina, they have like something ridiculous, like as many paper dollars as there are in the United States or something, some insanity like that, right? So, you have sort of ways that essentially frictional effects keep people in the system. And then, of course, they have to be in the system to gamble on OpenAI. In fact, one of the craziest things about our financial system, and, to people who are serious economists or financial people and really believe that there's basically like nothing wrong here, I'm basically like, well, what is really wrong? Is a concept that actually should not exist and makes no sense. I'll give you 2 words: passive investing. Right? You're just like, actually, I have no alpha. I'm not adding any information to this information market. But there is something else called beta, right? And what is beta? Beta is the government printing money, right? What is beta? Beta is the government printing money. If you have a hard money financial system, you will not have beta. Right. and like
buy an index fund and
right. And so you're sort of forced to like, you're forced to take on risk that you don't want, right? Because actually it should be, if you're like, I want money in 30 years, Like in a financial system that is like sane and stable, you're like, I want to move my spending power from now to 30 years from now. So I need to find somebody who wants a mortgage, who wants to move the spending power in the other direction. That will create an interest rate. And really, what if I just know I want to take this money out in 2056, I should buy a CD maturing in 2056, and that will be the best value. And that CD, let alone leaving in your freaking checking account, that CD will be utterly massacred by an index fund, right? And that's why we force you to gamble, right? And it's a crazy system, right? It is actually a completely crazy thing. The only people that should be in an information market, which is a prediction market, are two kinds of people who have alpha and people who think they have alpha, right? And what a financial market should be is a zero-sum game. It's like polymarket. It's a zero-sum game. It's people who have alpha taking money from people who think they have alpha. It's like professional poker. You have, the fish, right? And the fish are what you eat, right? It's like if you're an advantage player and you're in a room full of advantage players, it's like basically it's like you're in a singles bar, but it's a sausage fest, right? They don't want to play each other.
This show is brought to you by my lead sponsor, Iron, the AI cloud for the next big thing. Iron builds and operates next-generation data centers and delivers cutting-edge GPU infrastructure, all powered by renewable energy. Now, if you need access to scalable GPU clusters or are simply curious about who is powering the future of AI, check out iron.com to learn more, which is IREN.com. So, your view on AI, I think you're right. And I think the pace of change is what's going to frighten people. I think the pace of change of six-figure salaries just being wiped out and not returning, and how it could be a couple with 3 kids, and he's a lawyer on 150 grand, and she's a marketing exec on 120 grand. They live in a nice middle-class lifestyle, and suddenly in 12 months, neither of them's got a job, and there's no job to go to. And how we shift based on that. Like we looked it up the other day, 17.7% of all jobs in the UK are basically in accounting, law, creative, or HR industries.
Yeah.
And even if you've lost half of those jobs, that's millions of jobs lost with nothing to go to instead. And then if that happens, then, they have to sell their houses. So we're going to have a deflationary moment in the housing market. Are we going to have to go to UBI? This is something that feels 12 to 18 months out. The Microsoft AI CEO said this is 12 to 18 months out. Claude is replacing industries. SaaS products they're basically, if you've got shares in a SaaS product, you're at high risk at the moment. Like, what is this? This what you want to happen, and it's what is going to happen. And it's right. Like, where is your head at with that?
Well, what I feel in sort of the proper design of a polity for the 21st century, to me, maximizing GDP and maximizing hedonic, because when you're maximizing GDP, you're maximizing hedonism, essentially.
Yes.
That's what GDP is measuring. It's like how much fun did the economy produce, right? And I think that in order to operate a functional society in the 21st century, that view of economics needs to change to a view in which you're like, no, the real goal of economic management is matching a labor supply with labor demand, is basically making sure that every normal, healthy human being in the system is demanded. What do you do with all the Uber drivers? 12 to 18 months. So many things of that kind, right? And you see in a way, both foreign trade and migration is actually a little taste of the future, because when you're importing basically slave labor, you're treating them like Optimus robots, basically. You don't have a social connection to your Optimus robot, and you don't have a social connection to your Uber driver, Mohammed from Oman, right? You just don't, right? And one of them is a fellow human being, one of them is not. But actually the distance on the social graph from you to Mohammed from Oman probably runs through some Gulf Prince or something, and it's 30 steps long, Right. And when you have basically a labor class that is not socially connected to the labor demanding class, that's already a robot economy. That's already a slave economy. Basically, somebody on Twitter came up with something really nice about the whole immigration system that I really loved. Maybe it's not comprehensible on this side of the Atlantic, but the point.
Try me.
He's like, what this immigration phenomenon is what you're seeing is Americans have become half abolitionist and half slaveholder. They're abolitionists because they have the moral theories of abolitionists, but actually the labor structure of their economy is very reminiscent of the Confederacy. And, what you will see when with these immigration crackdowns is, well, he'll limit, limousine liberals in Santa Monica being like, Anna Maria can't take care of my children today, right? Because Anna Maria didn't get emancipated exactly, but like something like that. She got deported. And the result is the same. Anna Maria is not there, and you're going to have to go to your law job. Oh wait, that doesn't exist anyway. So why don't you take care of the kids, right? And like, and that's what you're seeing. I think we're seeing sort of the same thing of like, actually, this system, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense in a lot of different ways, is kind of surviving on these kind of frictional structures, and then when the friction evaporates, it's just gone, right? And what do these people do? I don't know. Nobody's starving in America. There's soup kitchens, there's SNAP cards, EBT. You can sell the house, you can live on that for a while. It's kind of grim. And moreover, you have this situation where, at the same time, as these countries import huge numbers of military-aged men to do menial labor, they have large numbers of people in the country who are not even capable of doing menial labor because they're just like tower block chavs, and like actually work is entirely beyond them. Work is not beyond Muhammad from Oman, and so you have, this huge problem of people who don't know how to work, are not interested in work. They're certainly not interested in working with their hands. Oh my God. Right. And, you're sort of confronting AI is leading you to confront this problem of, matching these things. And even before AI, you'd already been screwing it up for 30 years.
So are we at a fork in the road where for most of these nations, they've got really two options. One is to head to a much more socialist path to try and win votes and secure power. And the other option is a much more disciplined nationalist approach.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a third approach, which is the default approach, which is just everything turns into the third world. Because the third world is exactly like this. You have a number of small in a third world country. I don't know how much time you spend in the third world country, but in any third world country that isn't, say, Papua New Guinea, there are like very, very rich people who live very, very well. Although it is very expensive to live well as a rich person, typically in the third world. But labor is very cheap, but other things are not.
But this is the socialist path to me, the third world.
Well,
it's kind of the same.
The third world is full of socialist ideology, but it doesn't really live in a like William Morris, there's no equality in the third world. It's the opposite of equality. If you go to Angola, for example, one of the places where real estate is the most expensive in the world is Angola. It's the part of Luanda that is actually like where some amounts of civilization has survived. And where if you're working in the oil industry, which is needless to say, not run by Angolans, that's where you live, and you're like basically extracting this enormous amount of oil from Angola and enriching a small group of corrupt bureaucrats, and then there's a lot of money left over, and you use that money to like fly in $200 hamburgers, right?
Do you think the UK is heading towards that third world version?
Of course, it's already there in so many different ways,
Okay.
right? You know, and like, you know, come on, you can't. I guess you don't have like the shanty towns really here or anything quite like that.
Yeah, but you know, you have the early birth of them when tent
Yeah.
cities that didn't used to appear, and now you'll drive through London, you'll look down the street, and there's 40 tents. I mean, it's the start.
It's a start. It's a start. It's not, you know, so what you're going to see, the way that's here's how that's going to continue. So one of the things you're seeing politically, like as this old kind of mind management system breaks up and people, all the cordon sanitaires fall down and people get red pilled in various ways, you might think that people getting red pilled in various ways is something that would really put a stop to this craziness of population replacement. Oh no, actually it's quite very much the reverse, because there's something, you know, anyone who's like totally lost faith in the left in a way, it's like they have many complaints with the left, but it sort of all boils down to you basically recognize that this is not a vegetarian thing. This is a predator, right? And so this is a predator. And so when a predator such as a lion is hunting, there are basically two phases of the pursuit. There's the stalk and the charge. And the stalk is like, well, nobody really knows what's going on here. Like, let's take the demographic replacement in the U.S. It's from the 1965 Immigration Act, and politicians swore up and down that this was not what it was, basically. Since that act, basically, it's brought like 100 million people from the third world into the U.S., right? Something like that. Solid numbers like that. But in order to sort of do that, you know, you couldn't have this giant boat lift where, you know, some gigantic version of the Empire Windrush brought 100 million people at the same time. It's more a case of like, you know, slowly catchy fish, right? You know, where you're kind of tickling it and you're like, oh yeah, our friends from, you know, we're open, our hearts are welcoming, right? You know, like all of this, like, you know, stuff that's just, of course, unbelievably sinister because it's sort of trading on people's goodwill and people's good wishes. It's like this con. But the thing is, when enough people see the con, and all of these systems are incentive based, they're not based on planning. The left is not run by some cabal. It's incentives that drive things. What you're seeing, especially in what used to be called the White Dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, especially, is you're seeing they're starting to speed run. They're starting to come out of their crouch and basically just be like, yeah, actually, in the 21st century, I think they've increased the population of Canada by like 35%, right? And so even that is small. The Spanish government was just like, we're going to legalize 500,000. Oh, but that's just an estimate. That's just an estimate of how many people that plan will suck in. It probably will be more like over 1 million, right? And so, you know, and those people are Schengen. They can go anywhere in Europe, and you will see them do that. And so what you could see in the U.S. if basically the next time Democrats win the presidency, people talk about like mass immigration. Like, no, we've not seen mass immigration. We have no idea what mass immigration is. Mass immigration is not 2 million people entering the U.S. a year. Mass immigration starts, I would not call it mass until it was like 10 a year. And like mass immigration is really the 10 to 50 to 100 million a year.
But that's what could spark civil war.
No.
I don't know. I'm seeing it here.
No, because people have no balls. And actually, like, you know, they will not resist. All of, you know, the thought that they will get their muskets and put on their tri-cornered hats or whatever. You know, when you go back into the period when people actually did this, you're just like, fuck, these people are completely alien to us. Never happen. It won't happen at all. What will happen is exactly what happened in South Africa, which is they will just acknowledge that they've lost all of their power forever, and then they will sit quietly in their houses and build more and more barbed wire and electric fences until finally they are exterminated in one big pogrom. That's the future. That's what will happen to your children. Well, you know, and so like literally,
yeah,
like, you know, unless your money will be a fair protection as it is in South Africa, but like, you know,
But the reaction here, Curtis, is that we're seeing the rise of ethno-nationalism and debates around remigration, which was something people wouldn't even have discussed a decade ago. Deportations sounds like something the Nazis might do, or it sounds like it's racist. And look, sure, the left are calling it racist, but it now could be a vote winner. It could be an election winner.
It could be an election winner, and the thing is that but winning elections is really just the start, and as we have seen over and over again, winning elections is really just the start. And one of the things that going back to the Farage versus Lowe question, the new Overton window, right?
Yep.
You're basically like, there are people that will tell you, as we have already discussed, that Farage is not real, Nigel is real, and Nigel is actually a very deep and cagey thinker. And
but who wants to be prime minister, Nigel or Farage?
Yeah, well, that's what Dominic found with Boris. Basically, Dom wanted to he wasn't. I don't know. He's a little wonky, whatever. But he wanted to actually do things with the UK government. And they get into number 10, and he realizes that Boris, for all his, legendary brain power, just wants to sit in number 10 and look good, like any other occupant of number 10, basically, for really quite some time. And his goal is just to stay on the horse, which is one of the great metaphors from Carlyle from 170 years ago, right? And he's not riding the horse in any direction. The horse will go in whatever direction it goes. He just wants to stay on the horse. And in Carlyle's metaphor, the horse is following its own footsteps in a circle, right? And whereas, so maybe Farage, maybe Nigel wants to rule. It's hard to know. Rupert wants to rule.
So I'm going to disagree with you. So firstly, I'm going to say, I think Farage built a lot of political capital by being Farage.
Yes.
And
But does he want to spend it on being Nigel?
I don't think he does. I think he thinks he cannot win as Nigel. And I think that's going to be potentially his mistake. To be seen, there's a lot that Rupert has to do. I think the great thing about Rupert is he doesn't want to be prime minister. He feels he has a duty.
Yes.
He's like that. Who's the Greek? Canisia? I can't remember his name.
Cincinnatus. That's Roman, not Greek.
And by the way, I'm stealing that. That was Connor Tomlinson told me that. But I think he feels a duty to do it, which is why he doesn't change character. I think he would go in, he would do it for as short a time as possible and leave. He has no want for anything. He wants to be on his farm.
But the thing is, so first of all, that the sense of duty, sensing that there's that power is a duty rather than a privilege, or rather than a source of status. It's something that
it's a burden.
It's a burden, right? And the thing is, when you don't see it as a burden, I have a lot of good things to say about Trump, but ultimately, I don't think that Trump sees power as a burden.
No.
And that's why, in a way, it's sort of in a perverse way, that's why he doesn't really want more of it. He doesn't understand, the people who want power. I mean, the libs actually they really do. It's a compulsion, it's a craving, but in their minds, it's a duty. It's basically, in the mind of a heroin addict, it must feel sort of like God needs you to get heroin, now, right? And so the libs feel this duty. Everyone who grew up watching the fucking West Wing or whatever, they feel this duty, right? And we kind of don't. We don't feel to say, the furthest thing from Elon Musk's mind is, it is my duty to get more power. That's in fact what everyone is accusing him of thinking, him and all the other dissonant billionaires. And when somebody accuses you of something which is not true, your immediate impulse is, of course, to deny it. And that locks you into that denial pretty hard. And so actually you have this strange situation where these people are accused of having this power craving, which actually they should have in the form of come on, this is you're I'm sorry, Elon, your duty is Earth, not Mars, right? Much better planet, much better planet. And like, you sort of see like that they kind of, their will is to evade that duty. And so, for example, when Trump won the election, if he had recognized sort of governing as a duty, he would have realized that like dicking around with executive orders is not a thing with a lot of legs. And he actually needs to take control of Congress, which is hard, but possible with his razor slim majorities. And so if his basically was like, if he was, if I can coin a word, power maxing, with two X's, right? He would have basically been like, all right, how do I use my like little foothold in the White House to actually get to the point where FDR was at, where I could write legislation in the White House? But he does not have a burning need to write legislation in the White House. He has a burning need to look good on camera and be the leader of the free world, right? And so his enemies have a burning need for power. He doesn't have a burning need for power. What the hell is going to happen? Right. And so, and when that need comes from, I mean, the relationship in the minds of, what Abraham Lincoln called the family of the lion and the tribe of the eagle, the relationship between ambition and like a sense of duty, say, for example, in the mind of someone like Napoleon, is complicated. Right. But did Napoleon feel that his duty was to rule France? He absolutely did. I was reading a little bit about Lowe, and I was struck by the fact that Lowe's personal hero is also my personal guru's personal hero. And that's, of course, Cromwell. Right.
Happy to cut the head of a king.
Well, actually, of course, there's two Cromwells, and we could.
Oh, we could. Have I got the wrong one?
No, you have the right one.
Yeah, okay.
You have the right one. But you have the right one. Although I don't know that was entirely Cromwell's decision, because I don't think he was completely in control of the whole situation at that point.
He gets the credit.
He gets the credit, right? And then there was the one who dealt with the monasteries, which also has, I think, resonance in our day. And I mean, in a way, like really, I was sort of thinking about this for something that I'm writing recently, and I'm like, the question in a way is how far back you sort of have to go to like revise history. How far back do you have to go sort of delineate a period whose echoes are still like present today? And I think the number is about 500 years. And that basically takes you to the point when Henry VIII is like, no, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm not just going to continue the system of Henry VII. And the real OG in English history and ultimately world history, because England took over the world, is Henry VII. He's just a massive, he's like founder energy up the wazoo. Guy just barely even has a legitimate claim to the throne. He's like Welsh. He's Welsh, right? Somehow he pulls this off and founds this very, creates the modern English nation state in a way by sort of reassembling England from the Wars of the Roses. And then, but he's a skinflint. He's like basically manages money very, very tightly. And then Henry VIII is, he likes to spend money. Does Henry? He likes to spend money. And so basically, the thing about Henry VII is that there isn't really any news. Like nothing really happens. It's like not a drama. It's like, he reigns from like 1485 to like 1512 or something like that. No drama. Imagine like 27 years or whatever it is of English politics with no drama, right? Nothing happens during the reign of Henry VII. And certainly not in the way that it happens with the rest of the Tudors, right? And so you have basically like the idea of Cromwell specifically is like, and this is what is so inspiring about Cromwell for Carlyle, is Cromwell is just like, look, I'm here. I'm going to deal with the realities. Like there's a lot of bullshit. We got rid of the old fusty old monarchist bullshit, but now we have this like weird psycho Puritan independent fifth monarchy men, diggers, levelers bullshit. All right, because this is modernity is really happening at that point, right? It's really kicked off, and you have people who just could be left as a Glastonbury like tomorrow, right? Who are running around in the 17th century. And Cromwell is just like, I just have to run the English state and make it like extremely badass. And I think there are many elements of the Cromwellian state that survive the Restoration and that are basically core to England today.
And do you think that we're essentially in this very similar position now, and it's perhaps if
history only rhymes? But the thing about, it's like when you talk about civil war, for example, coming out of these things, I think that there's, most people who talk about civil war in that sense, at least, or at least in some way LARPing, they're projecting a vanished world into the present. And one of the things that we really learned from the Trump administration, from the second Trump administration, is you must be familiar with the line, like, we can just do things.
Yeah.
Right. And, I think somewhere subconsciously in Washington, people really, of a governing class persuasion, really thought that if you did something like abolishing USAID, which is one of the most oldest, most revered, most prestigious organizations in the federal government, I think without thinking it consciously, they really thought that if something like that was done, like the blacks of Anacostia would rise up. And I'm just like, no, the blacks of Anacostia will not rise up. No, foreign service officers will not be, forming barricades and tearing up cobblestones in the streets of Georgetown. No, that's not how it works. And like that also, you see that also that tremendous LARPing in the fall of the Soviet system, because the Soviet system sort of comes out of this revolutionary Bolshevik tradition where it's just like, you have to be hard and kill the enemies of the workers and peasants, and you're a revolutionary. And like, as soon as it starts to fall, these people who have lived in this LARP where they're revolutionaries realize that they're not actually revolutionaries at all. And you would expect them to fight. When the Soviet Union falls, it has like 500,000 trained KGB special forces, right? These people are actually literally trained to kill. What do? They do nothing because they're not a bunch of killers, right? And you're in the Stasi, the day before the Stasi falls, you're a major in the Stasi in East Germany. It's like being a New York Times reporter. Like everybody wants to know you. Everybody wants to be your friend. You're just like a big swinging dick. You've seen the way these guys walk, like people with power just have this like aura, right, of like people have been sucking up to them for like so long. And you meet like a bigwig, like major media reporter, like, and they have this vibe of like just every cell in their body knows they're an important person. Right. And that's what it must have been like to be a major in the Stasi. You're basically just like, everybody, is like, can you help with this? Can I, right. And you can. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Right. Day after it falls, you're like, all right, I'm a major in the Stasi. This is a revolutionary organization that goes back to Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. And, if the imperialists ever come in, we'll fight them in the cafes. We'll be building bombs. We'll be like, what would Karl and Rosa do? Day after, it's just like you go to work, building's locked, card key doesn't work, try to log in, password not recognized. You're just like, oh, I guess I need to go start building bombs. No, you don't go start building bombs because you're not a cafe revolutionary and it's not 1931, and like actually like you realize, oh, wait, that was a LARP. I better hope they pay me my pension. And then when they do pay you your pension, and I think the German government is still paying pensions to Stasi, veterans. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
What?
Oh, yeah. Because when you win, you take ownership of those people. They're your people now. You own the whole thing, and you're just like, yeah, all right, you work for the system. Everybody worked for the system, whatever, right? I think they actually the Stasi had a very generous pay package, and they cut it to some extent.
But what does this all mean for now? Like,
what it means for now is that basically if Rupert Lowe comes in and is just like, it's like the end of Inception. You saw Inception. You're just like, suddenly everything is just like falling down and treats Whitehall like the Stasi, and is just like, because here's another thing that we learned from the Trump administration, and we learned that largely from these kids at Doge, and these kids at Doge were operating really they were not operating in a highly AI enabled way. But what they realized is that actually taking control of these things simply through their IT systems is actually like really extremely possible. And so what you do if you're really like, dedicated to absolute change is you just like, all right, it's here in England, it's easy. There's no English constitutional tradition more sacred than the absolute powers of Parliament. And
if you win a parliamentary majority,
absolutely. Somebody, I was talking to this line, and somebody was like, well, they might use the king. I'm like, wow,
no.
Well, I mean, that thing in Spain, they couldn't pass it through the legislature, so they're doing it as a royal decree. And they have this poor playboy prince, son of the completely useless Juan Carlos II, who's like even more corrupt and useless. And basically what it means to him to be king is he has been taught that the modern way of being a king is that you sign whatever's put in front of you. And so I could see it actually, because those reserve powers still exist under law. I don't think that they have like the strength to do that. But the idea that, Rupert Lowe is like, all right, we're dissolving the Foreign Office. Why do we need a Foreign Office? If we have something to say to the French, we'll just Zoom, and like, I don't really think that the workers and peasants of England are going to rise up if that happens. And I also do not see the mandarins of the Foreign Office taking to violence. And I'm like, actually, and the effect once you're doing big things, like actually the sort of the tragedy of the Trump administration is with things like USAID, you started to see pieces of that fall of East Germany psychology where just like morale just collapses. Once you've taken down the Stasi, the rest of the East German government is not going to offer any resistance whatsoever. And in the modern AI-enabled world, you're like, all right, how are you going to do this? Wow, this government does all this stuff in all these ways. You're like, all right, we're going to identify all the real service points that people need to rely on. We're not going to have any chaos or whatever, your import license or whatever will go through. We will identify all the real service points of this government. We will instantly cut everything else. So it's like basically like the direct service points, 5 to 10% of staff. Then for that, you keep operating those things as is for the moment. But what you're really going to do is you're going to image the servers and operate it with a completely different team that has and is run in a completely different way that has full access to those files and every email they ever sent. And you can basically just like reboot that organization functionally with a completely different set of people and much fewer people at that.
Yeah. So, like Elon Musk did with X. Like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, you took it from like 3,000 engineers to like 30.
Yeah.
Right. Is this some shit broken? Yeah, some shit is broken, but not much. Right. And so you're basically, and even that was an iterative process there. It was a process of attrition. He didn't just say, oh, I'm bringing my 30 guys in here. We're going to image the servers and everybody else go home. Right. It sort of worked out that way in the end, but he also did not have these tools at that time in order to do that. And so when you're, the thing is, when you're really there to rule and you come in and you're in charge, you're basically just like, why would I keep using these organizations?
But this is kind of the tragedy then of reform, because their original appeal was they weren't the establishment. Like, they were anti-establishment, and they've morphed into the establishment. Yes, they're talking about repealing some laws, and they're talking about.
Well, weren't they? Wait. I mean, the thing that I heard was just like, it's so huge that I can barely wrap my head around it. I think Farage was talking about even as high as a 10% cut in the beer tax.
Yeah, 5p off. 5
and
pence off
I'm
the
just
beer.
like, and I'm like, wow, that is like levels of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. That is just like
Yeah, that's
full
not
out comedy, right? You
it's not
know,
going to
like
save any pubs. Like, look, if
yeah,
the thing that's going to save pubs is getting rid of business rates and getting rid of a minimum
I
wage.
and it's just so beyond that. Even I mean, yeah, like the whole fabric of there's this book. You must know the writer Kingsley Amis.
Oh, I know the name. I don't know him as
Yeah,
a writer.
yeah. He's the father of Martin Amis, who is perhaps somewhat better known these days, but a great mid-century writer. And he wrote this book that is one of his later books, which is really very little known. It's called Russian Hide and Seek, and it takes place in an England that has been conquered by Soviet Russia, like 40 years ago or so previously. And there's a new generation of apparatchiks who are actually like Anglophiles. And they're like, we're going to restore English culture. We're going to restore England. We're going to have like maypoles and like, not to, spoil anyone's experience of this lovely book, but basically, they're kind of trying to resuscitate a corpse. Now, you're like, all right, let's bring the pubs back. Are there pubs in England? Are there, yes, there are. Are there cobblers in England? Yes, there are. You don't get all of your shoes from Vietnam, but I think to sort of, in a way, bring the level of the revolution that is needed home, in a sense, what you're basically seeing, especially with AI, but in retrospect also with the Industrial Revolution in a way, is that the power that man is acquiring over the physical world starts to resemble in some ways the power that a game designer has over the virtual world. And one of the things we see about the virtual worlds that game designers create is that there are always monsters in them. There's always difficulty. You always have to grind. You have to whatever. And that is exactly because the job of the game designer is to create labor demand. The laborer is the player, right? And the player not only has to, this is why the gamers have the term grinding. The player not only has to, grind, right? But really the goal is to have the grinding be fun. Like actually, so what you're trying to do in your like cornucopia, Aaron Bastani, fully automated, luxury communism world is you've created a video game that sucks because basically there is no difficulty, there is no danger, you've created Wall-E World, right? That old Pixar film.
Well, have you played Socialist Monopoly?
No, what is that?
So I've got it, like Monopoly Socialism. I bought a copy of it and I played it with my kids. It never ends. The game never ends. You can't win the game because if you get anywhere, it redistributes.
Yeah, but the thing is actually a world where you do not need. So in a way, what you're saying when you basically take what the game designer can do is change the rules of the world to make the game harder in a way that works. So he's like, this virtual world is boring without monsters, so we're going to have monsters, right? Minecraft didn't used to have monsters, and then they were like, no, we need mobs, right? And so you create monsters, you create danger, danger in real life, different thing, but maybe could see it, right? Why do people do extreme sports, right? War is the ultimate extreme sport. There's that form of danger. You change the rules of the world and you say, all right, war is part of humanity. Humans without violence are not humans. They're sheep. They're some other life form, right? Actually, men need war to live. The problem isn't war. The problem is artillery. The problem isn't war. The problem is everything that makes war really shitty. Okay, we're going to have war, but we're going to have rules of war, and the rules of war are going to be like no explosives, no electricity, no chemicals. You got to go full Homer, right? Or you could basically say, well, the world in which basically your shoes are created by a printer or by, slave labor in Vietnam, doesn't, really change anything. The thing is you get shoes without work. So actually, a world in which you get shoes without work doesn't really work, because actually people need to do something. And one thing that actually you can take anyone with an IQ of 90 and you can make them a very good shoemaker. You can take someone with an IQ of 90 and make them an artisan who can do things that would just blow either of us away.
Well, this is the Ready Player One problem.
Yes.
The Ready Player One problem, in that I would love to walk on stage and play guitar for Metallica at Wembley Stadium.
Yeah.
But I haven't been and played the club circuit where 20 people turn up. I haven't sat in the bus with 5 other stinky guys going and trying to sell 2 T-shirts so I can afford the next concert. I haven't earned it. When I walk out on stage, it's not authentic.
You have to, and you haven't earned your shoes, and you haven't done, so basically man needs, this Naruto line, struggle, iron, and volcanoes, right? And so you have this force that on the one hand is an impoverishing force, and then it has sort of, people are like, oh, well, we'll give you UBI, which you can spend on your shoes that are no longer made in Vietnam, but are now made in the UK by robots, right? And you're living like a child, and it's this sort of massive dehumanization of the human race. And the alternative is to say, no, actually, the world, now that we have all this productive power, we need to actually design a world like, a video game and, crafting in video games, right? You want a pair of shoes, right? You have to craft the shoes. That's artificial labor demand. You can't just click a button and clone 100,000 of the shoes. There's no shortage of bits to do that. But actually, if you did that, it would kill crafting, right? And so you basically realize that in a way, in the kind of world that you have to create here, it's like everything is fake, right? In order to ban machine-made shoes from Vietnam, you have to have, it's not a libertarian thing. You got to have got a guy at the port who looks in the container is like, I knew it. Shoes, and treats it like cocaine, right? Because, those shoes will actually destroy the lives of good American artisans who have to make shoes by good British artisans who have to make shoes by hand from all British materials.
So what
and so that is a complete restructuring of the way we live.
I want to talk to you about one of my sponsors, Incogni. And that means we're going to talk about the weird world of spam. And I don't just mean those spam emails that you get day after day from companies you never heard of and companies you've never signed up to. I'm also talking about those spam phone calls you get from those people who seem to know a little bit too much about you, trying to get your bank details. It's all a bit creepy, right? Now, this all comes from the world of data brokerage. There are companies out there collecting your data, building profiles, and sending that data to anyone who wants it, which is why when one of those scammers phones you up, they seem to know everything about you. Now, I've tried myself to get off these lists, try to get off the phone lists, try to get off the email lists. I unsubscribe from every one of these emails that comes in, but this game of whack-a-mole, it just never ends. And so this is where Incogni comes in. They do all the hard work for you. They reach out to these companies and they will get you legally removed from these lists. And I know because the last time they sponsored my show, I signed up and I didn't take the free option that they offered me. I wanted to pay for it. I wanted to see if you get value for money. And they removed me from 79 data broker lists. And so I've stayed on. I've stayed a subscriber and I have seen a massive decrease in the number of emails and phone calls I've been getting. So it's a great service. I recommend you check it out. If you're sick of this like I was, please head over to incogni.com/Peter and sign up. If you use the code Peter, you will get a lovely 60% discount. So that's incogni.com/Peter. So it's almost like the reverse Ready Player One. We have to construct a authentic real world for people to live in and have purpose.
Yeah.
Otherwise...
And that authentic real world has to be one with rules that prevent it from becoming purposelessness. And so it's like if you look at Luddites, the way you think in terms of Luddites is let's ban the new technology. Let's ban AI. Let's ban genome sequencers, something. Actually, to fix the economy, it's the old technology that you have to ban. It's the first things that were killed by the Industrial Revolution. and you're just like, what are like 10 million people, going to do? And you're just like, well, actually, they could make shirts. And like, if there was no way to make a shirt by machine, then, sure, your shirts cost $200.
Yeah.
But like, that productivity is coming out of the cornucopia of AI. And the person who made the shirt actually enjoyed making the shirt. And it's a nice frickin' shirt.
Well, this
right?
is,
It's sort of the Etsyification of the economy, essentially.
But this is one of the arguments for the kind of like the world where we move to much more AI and automation, is that actually there will be another economy built, an authentic economy built on people who desire things that are created by humans.
Yeah, but the problem is that there's not enough of that. And the thing is, people don't, what really is the difference between your Gucci bag and your knockoff Gucci bag? Well, your real Gucci bag was created by Italians and your knockoff Gucci bag was created by Chinese, and you feel much personally closer to Italians than Chinese. But the thing looks the same. It's the same supple leather, and so, actually, if you're trying to do this in a libertarian way, it doesn't work.
You can't.
Yeah. But if you're trying to do it in a non-libertarian way, and you're basically doing full-on William Morris Guild socialism, actually it can. And so you're back in, and this was sort of a dream in a way of the arts and crafts movement in the late 19th century. They were a little early on that, but they basically, this is also Carlylean, because this is like Ruskin, who was a Carlylean. They sort of recognized that, the dignity of fulfilling work is essentially a work that challenges you to your limits is actually, that is the thing that we should desire most, and not luxury or fentanyl or coke whores or whatever. No, we should want to be cobblers. There's this great, you must know of the actor Cecil Day-Lewis, right?
Yeah, he stopped making films to go and be a cobbler.
Yeah, I'm like, if it's good enough for Cecil Day-Lewis, who's not only an actor but also an aristocrat, he apprenticed to an Italian cobbler for a couple of years, right? And it's like, actually, like, and I'm sure those were very high-end shoes, and I'm sure like probably they were, they're not cheap, right? But the thing is, you can construct, your society has to be a little bit of a video game with video game-like rules, like we're going to treat this container full of shoes from Vietnam like it was cocaine, right? And that is not a libertarian thing. It's just not a libertarian thing. And expecting it to happen spontaneously on its own in a libertarian way is, no, you're going to get the third world. Yeah. And so in a way, when you look at this sort of Carlylean, Cromwellian kind of picture of the Cromwell's government really took total responsibility, as did the royal governments before it, took total responsibility. There was nothing libertarian about either Cromwell or the Tudors, right? And, but kind of accepting that responsibility to rule is, it's a huge thing. It's like you actually have to have that Cincinnati spirit. And like one of the things that, like, when you just talk about flow, you said something earlier that was very, very, I thought very, very insightful, because you basically said that the problem is that Farage is making a mistake because basically he's a boomer, and because he's a boomer, he thinks only Farage can get elected and Nigel cannot get elected.
Yeah, and I haven't voted in 3 elections. I would have voted for Nigel. I can't vote for Farage because I know, and I'm
exactly.
I'm at a disadvantage because I know both of them.
Yeah,
and I would tell Nigel, like, what are you doing?
No, it's just because like, it's not actually what sells.
And in a world where you can see behind the veil, it's all bullshit. Every politician pretty much is fucking
break
useless.
The fourth wall,
dude. Today, Keir Starmer, our prime minister. Listen to this. This is fucking how retarded our government is. Today, our prime minister tweeted out this. Where is it? The choices this Labour government have made means inflation has fallen today to its lowest rate in a year. Lower food and petrol prices helping ease the pressure on household budgets. And I retweeted him. I said, it's a strange world where you're having to teach basic economics to our prime minister. Anyway, Keir, inflation falling doesn't mean lower prices. It just means prices are rising at a lower rate. But this is the level of incompetence we're dealing with.
Yeah. I mean,
and so I just cannot buy into that. I just want somebody to come in and be straight up honest. And he's being straight up honest. And the weird thing is,
people like it more.
There's a group of people ready for it, and a group who aren't.
Yeah.
The people who aren't still believe society has to say, no, you're a racist for thinking that. And it's funny, my friend sent me a meme yesterday, but the basic point is like, they're calling Rupert Lower a racist. He would happily sit at a dinner table with Modi, Bukele, Millet, Trump, like people from all different countries of races, and they would get on like the best of friends.
I mean, well, as we say in America, I don't know if you say this here, but if you're a racist, it doesn't matter what race your friends are; they just all have to be racists.
but they're really nationalist and conscious.
Of course. And the thing is, it's like that transitional phase. It's like my friend Jeremy Carl had a rough time in his Senate hearing, the other day because he has this sort of problem of basically fitting. He has to basically complain about race communism without calling it race communism or violating any of the taboos of race communism. That's really pretty hard. And it's just like, and if you watch the way that sort of Farage, not Nigel, but Farage sort of will basically be attacked on these points and, very skillfully evade them.
Yes.
And you admire the skill with which he evades them, but fundamentally, as did Jeremy Carl the other day, when you're evading, people might find that you seem evasive. And Lowe just simply doesn't do this. Or at least not that I'm just observing like the sort of the latest things, Lowe doesn't do this. I'll give
you an example. Do you know who Matt Goodwin is?
Yes.
Yeah. So I like Matt. He's been here a couple of times, hung out with him. Yeah. Highly principled, but he's now running for a seat in Gorton and Denton or something, wherever it is, somewhere in Manchester. There's a complete personality shift that he's had to go through to fit into the party.
Yeah.
And it's so obvious. I can see it, and I get why he's had to do it because he has to now go and win a seat which has a large percentage of Muslims in that area. Right. He has to pretend who he isn't.
But at the same time, it's like seeing your friend transform into a lizard.
Yeah. It's the guy got a girlfriend and now he doesn't want to come to the football because he's going shopping or he's doing the gardening. And it's like, but then you go to Rupert's Twitter. I'll give you a couple examples.
What time do you have, by the way?
We're at 2. We got another half hour.
Yeah.
So a Restore Britain government would hold a referendum on the reintroduction of the death penalty. I mean, I don't agree with it. I don't want the state killing people, but he's there. What else has he got here? Restore Britain would abolish the OBR. I mean, it's so obvious it has to happen. All their predictions are fucking wrong. I mean, if you just go through, here's my mass deportations book. He's just he's gone, do you know what? I want to go zero fucks.
Yeah.
Here's zero fucks. Here's my zero fucks party. And do you know what I really like about them is that I think they've recognized there's 2 votes in the next election. There's establishment and anti-establishment, and they have to stay in that. And I like the fact they've talked about we don't want any other failed MPs. I mean, the Reform are just a bunch of architects of failure. They just want to get experts in. A bit like your thesis. He's the CEO. Yeah. And he needs to build his board.
You need Parliament shouldn't even be the board. Parliament should be a rubber stamp. And the thing is, actually, the effect of bringing in people who are not politicians is that they're trivial to whip. And because they're not, I don't have political careers. They're just part of this thing, right? They're just party members. And, being an MP is like a sort of dignity that they're given. They're not like actual players. And the thing is, basically, the effect of bringing all these players from the Tory party, which is now sort of reconstituted itself, under the the smile of Farage, it's only a matter of time. Is he going to take Kemi? What would happen if Kemi applied?
Fuck knows, man. Well, even generic today, like, I'm in politics for people like my dad and some fake ass video, and I'm like, no, you're not. You're in politics for yourself.
Yeah,
like, you were going to become the leader of the Conservative Party. You didn't get it. You know they're not going to win. You're looking at Reform, think Reform might win. I'm kind of like the largest name now, and if there's a problem with Nigel, I become the de facto leader. That's my fastest route to be prime minister. Stuff fucking bullshit in me.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, and it's like the FDR and the wheelchair thing. It's like a certain level of like puffery is kind of standard and acceptable, and it's like the people who voted for Barack Obama in 2008 when he was going about lying and saying, I believe that, marriage is between a man and a woman, right? And which is especially interesting considering his own, questionable sexuality. At least I have questions, and the
we're not going there.
We're not going there. Right? Yeah. We could fill up the next half hour with questions, right? But the thing is, his voters were like, oh yeah, he's lying. He's lying for a good cause. Like, that's cool. And like, that sort of acceptance of, again, this is very, very Carlylean. I really implore you to read the Latter-day Pamphlets, which is the great Carlyle work, because he's just like, people just accept that there's just all this bullshit and this like hugely important thing of government. He's just like, people are like, oh, that's a sham. Oh, he doesn't really believe that. People watch that video and nobody really watching that, and nobody who cares enough to watch a Robert Jenrick video is like so simple that they actually believe that what he's saying. Oh no, they're like, oh, that's the right tone for him to be striking. They sort of review it in this kind of meta sense. It's like, oh yeah, that's some good bullshit. That's some tasty bullshit. That's bullshit from the bullshit region of France.
Yeah, go shake some people's hands on video.
Right. And it's just like actually the sort of the act of breaking through that veil creates this effect where it's kind of, once you've seen something that is real, you'll never go back to the fake thing again. And I'll give you two great examples of this. One is from recent history. There was a nationalist politician in Serbia by the name of Slobodan Milosevic.
I remember.
You remember old Slobo.
I went to Yugoslavia before the war.
On what side?
I went there when I was 5 years old.
Oh.
Like, we had Yugoslavian friends, and they invited us to go and stay, and we drove from England to Yugoslavia. It took 2 days, and we had a car full of like radios and TVs because they couldn't fucking get them in the country.
Yeah. This was the 80s. This was
1983. We went to
And how old
Belgrade.
were you in 83?
I was 5.
Yeah.
We went to Belgrade, and then we went to what is Croatia now, and the beach. And it was a weird experience. I don't remember a lot of it, but I remember that's probably the most memories I have from being 5.
Well, Slobo was a mid-level or communist bureaucrat, and things started breaking up, and he basically goes down to Kosovo, which is this like historic territory where they've been sort of demographically swamped by Albanians, and he says to the Serbs in Serbian, of course, he has this sort of great classic line of populist politics. He's like, no one will dare to beat you anymore. Right? That is the essence of populist politics. Like, basically, you were being beaten, you were being abused, and like the first problem that you have to solve here is your battered wife syndrome. Right? And like, you have battered wife syndrome up the wazoo, you have Stockholm syndrome, you actually love your abuser, you're doing all of it. Okay. And so, first of all, you have this mindset. You're like, I need to fix my husband. I need to fix my husband. No, you don't.
You need to leave your fucking husband. Get the fuck away
No,
from him.
you don't. Right. And so the vibe of like, you need to leave your fucking husband, right, is like, just that people can even process that is like something where, it's politics. You're not leaving your husband just to be a nihilist. You're leaving your husband for someone you just met. Right. And so when that guy has that level of authenticity where he just like, awakens like something electric deep within your body that you thought was going to sleep forever, like no one will dare to beat you anymore. Yeah, you can sort of transform, apathy into reality. It's like that contrast between nobody sees the fake thing until like the real thing is next to it. It's like something that happened to me was I had this weird experience where I lived in Cyprus as a kid. And not only was I in Cyprus, I was going to the English school in Cyprus, which is a sort of faux British public school.
Is that in Larnaca?
No, Nicosia,
Nicosia.
The capital. And to add weirdness to that, I was basically skipped 3 grades ahead.
Okay.
Because I added 2 grades when I went there because they did things by admission tests. And I'm like, all right, sure.
This doesn't surprise me.
Right. And so that was a weird, cultural experience. But what was even weirder was when I got back to the United States and had to be a 12-year-old sophomore in an American public high school. That was very disorienting. I don't think I've ever really recovered from that. But in any case, although I have had sex, but since right. But so I'm sort of trying to accommodate myself, and I'm like, all right, well, I need to listen to the same music that these kids listen to. So I got a little boombox, and I started listening to like 80s top 40 radio. You must know 80s top 40, Cyndi Lauper, Bon Jovi,
In Excess.
In Excess is it has a little edge, but like Bon Jovi is like
the first album I ever bought was Bon Jovi New Jersey.
That was after Slippery When Wet, I think.
Yeah. It starts with Bad Medicine. I got a cassette player, and I walked to town, and I went to the cassette, and I bought that. I did have Europe's The Final Countdown as a single.
Oh wow,
that was the first song. My dad bought me that because I loved it.
Well, and I'm just thinking, Bon Jovi's, I'm a cowboy on a steel horse I ride. I'm wanted.
That's a bit later.
Dead or alive.
Yeah, that's a bit later.
Yeah. And so, that's the sort of thing that I'm listening to, right? And, it's not, Bon Jovi's still around. It's not entirely without merit or whatever. And then for whatever reason, there's some kind of contest. And Q107, this station, plays a Rolling Stones song.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, right? And the problem that basically UK politics in our, little pool of it is that basically like, you can't escape the impression that Farage is Bon Jovi and Rupert is the Stones, right? And like what's even worse is that Nigel is also the Stones. And like Nigel might be more the Stones than Rupert in a way, but like actually like Nigel doesn't come out to play.
No, see, is it maybe? Oh fuck. Maybe Nigel was in a Stones covers band.
Yeah.
Fuck, you just blown my mind there. Did you know why? I was chatting to I won't reveal his name just in case, but like somebody you would know. I'll tell you afterwards. Mm-hmm. And like he was talking to me about my podcast, and he was like saying, dude, you need to put on a suit. At the moment, you look like a tattooed football yob trying to have intelligent conversations. He was like, put on a suit. And I was like,
Works for Nick Fuentes.
I was like, I've started to wear a shirt. He's like, yeah, but your tattoos on your hands are a problem. You might need gloves. I'm like, I'm not wearing gloves. Like, fuck that. But he was saying, look, this is what this is how America sees the UK. He sees you in suits. He sees the America sees you as like disciplined English man, like tidy hair, tidy beard, discipline and getting shit done. And I think that's what it is. It's like Rupert isn't sloppy.
Yeah. Well, he was a serious businessman, right?
Yeah.
He
ran a football club.
Yeah, and the thing about a football club is like you're basically,
you can't win on the long term as a chairman, and you have tens of thousands of people calling you a wanker.
Yeah.
It's a tough gig.
You have the difficulty of being a business. You actually need to win. Winning is extremely hard. And then you have tens of thousands of people calling you a wanker.
And
how did he get into that? Was he a footballer?
I don't know, actually. I've never, but we've spoken about it because I own a much smaller club. Yeah. And like I have 3 people calling me a wanker. Like he has tens of thousands, but it's in some ways, it's like the comments on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
If you have a thing like this, you read the comments, they either break you or make you. And sometimes they break you before you make you, and then you just get stoic about it. So, yeah, well, I don't care. Yeah, all right, I'm fat, all right?
Yeah.
Like, I ask a question wrong. I'm a dumb, whatever. But you learn to not give a fuck.
Yeah.
And I actually think being a football club chairman prepares you for criticism.
Yeah.
Because because the thing is, a football club chairman, when the club's doing well, no one cares about you. But when it's failing, it's all your fault. And so, like, you kind of forged in steel being a football club chairman. So, like, I don't think there's anyone that could say anything where he goes, I don't think he goes, I don't care, fuck off. Call me a racist. I don't care.
And it's actually very attractive because what is unattractive is, there's an Islamic philosopher, Osama bin Laden, sorry, it's a bit. I do it all the time. And he has this great line where he's like, when people see a weak horse and a strong horse, by nature, they like the strong horse. And actually, like, they despise the weak horse. And the thing is, when you basically, someone accuses you of being a racist and you get all sort of, and I mean, there's no way the admin would have let him do this, but I think, for example, Jeremy Carl in that hearing, if he'd gone in with the mindset of like, I'm going to humiliate these senators and rub their noses in the shitty race bullshit that is like all around, the U.S. Do you know the latest race news from the U.S.? This blows my mind. Harvard. So remember they had this lawsuit where they're like basically like, Harvard is racist and it's getting federal money. How is this allowed? And because they are American conservatives and they are basically pussies in various ways, and they found the people suing they found that the best way, although this was probably not the issue closest to their hearts, they found that the best way to appeal to maybe the judge in this was to talk about how Harvard was mean to Asians. And it's true. Harvard discriminated against Asians like even more heavily than it discriminated against whites because they had no character or something like that. I mean, we could talk about that, but we won't. In any case, that was the rap. And really what they're like, Asians are not going to be donors. Asians are like, and I'm sure they're being very practical about these things. I'm sure it's not coming from deep-seated racial prejudice. I'm sure it's coming from just like Machiavellian data examination. In any case, they get sued, and it is undeniable that basically being an Asian makes it much harder to get into Harvard, and being black makes it much easier. And so we now have the data on what their response is. They're like, all right, we'll stop discriminating against Asians. We'll now just discriminate against white people. Fuck you, right? And so when you sort of come in with this kind of aggressive, like, I'm coming into a press conference, my team has just lost they've been relegated or whatever. And, and I'm just going to be like, all right, let's talk about why we get relegated, and you go on the attack. Who you're attacking, I don't know, right? And it's just much more sympathetic than like running away. And so when you put yourself in a position where like Farage has to put himself in, where he's like, swearing up and down that anyone can be an Englishman, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not as compelling.
But it's not compelling.
Yeah. But the thing is, it is compelling when you compare it to, Keir Starmer. It is compelling when you compare it to Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, but it depends where voters are at. Because like somebody said something to me recently. They said, the thing about politics is like, there's what people say and what they think. And what matters in the ballot box is what they think. And there are too many people who can't say what they think because of social consequences, or just aren't brave enough to say what they think. And somebody like Rupert Lowe is just smashing through the Overton window, and he's enabling people to say things. So Jim Ratcliffe...
Trump, that's some of the best thing that Trump has done.
I don't know if you saw Sir Jim Ratcliffe. What he said, and look, I think his choice of words was actually poor. It damaged the point, because he then had to go on the defense and apologize. But like, again, he's smashing through the Overton window. Like, people are breaking cover and saying, I think this immigration experiment has failed. I think this diversity experiment has failed. I think multiculturalism has failed. And like the problem is like
The battered housewife syndrome, right?
yeah, and it's like, come on, can we have some nuance here? There's good immigration and bad immigration. Can we just have that conversation?
Yeah.
It's like you have
Can
to
we have
accept
that
one or the other.
conversation? What does it actually mean to be British, right? And is it a legal status? Is it a like, and like that's a, resolving these questions, or in a way it's like, when you think about regime change, really, I think that Farage is under the opinion that wherever he wants to go, he can go there slowly without risking his neck too much. And I think that's also a strategic mistake. I don't think the right can move slowly, basically. And the slower, it's just the left is incremental, the right is not. I'm not saying that every step has to be made in one, but fundamentally it's entropy versus extropy. The left is entropic, so things can just decay. But if you're building something, you need to build, right? So I think that the idea in the mind of the sort of Farages of their world is, you have this kind of the incremental subversion of the system, which they think is possible. It's an aging system. It's much more subvertible than it used to be, but I still basically don't think of that as possible.
No.
If you have someone more like Rupert Lowe, my suspicion is the way Rupert Lowe sees it. I think he's sort of thinking in terms of something less like 100% regime change and more like 40% regime change. The thing is, if you're thinking of like 1%, 2% regime change, that's going to slide back down. And before you know it, it's 0.1% and 0.01%. Once you're up at like 30, 40, you're just like, why can't I do it all?
Well,
right. And like and that's when you get like really Cromwellian, basically.
Yeah. My hot take on this is that actually I've considered Reform still a left-wing party. And I think the reason I have is because I think we've forgotten what a proper right-wing Conservative party looks like. And all I think they're going to do is they're going to come in, they're going to tweak some things. We're still going to have a massive welfare state.
You'll still have a beer tax. It's just 5 pence lower.
Yeah, 5 pence lower. And we want people to work, we'll not work from home. But I still think we'll just have a very large state. The debt will increase. And all they're going to do is like change who they point things at. But it's still the
Boolean.
same.
It's Boolean. It's basically, and it's like even with, Trump's achievements, if you compare the second Trump administration to the first Trump administration to the Bush administration, these are monumental achievements. Like he's reversed the flow of migration, he's sealed the borders, whatever. They're all things that could be reversed in 3 days by the next administration, right? And like you have not actually, once you abandon the illusion that you can basically just do a good government without actually really rethinking. Once you basically realize that actually it is your duty to get as much power as possible, and in exactly the sense of duty that you described, a 40% regime change is very unstable because you basically are like, okay, have we defeated the other 60% or have we not defeated them? They will feel very defeated. And so like either you're just like, no, actually 100% is right. Let's just, swoop in and scoop them all up while they're feeling defeated. That is clearly the right thing to do. The wrong thing to do is just to be like, well, we won, it's over, boys. Let's let them, that lets them kind of regroup and re-strengthen. And so, when you're winning, you need to basically keep them on the run entirely. And that means, it's like, what's on the other end of like, the beer tax, right? Okay, that's really thinking small in a way. That is, I'm sure it's an issue that touches Englishmen's hearts deeply, but it's like, to an American, it's like one of the, you sort of look at American politics and you're just like, oh my God, they're spending this much time on something completely retarded, right? Yeah. What's on the other end of that scale? You're like, I don't know, restore the empire, at least, maybe clean up South Africa. You could really try to suck most of the technical talent out of the US. You could do a really strong reverse brain drain. Your legal system is probably completely fucked, so you need a recodification of the laws.
Well, we need to start writing that now. Ready.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. And so the thing is, it's like the lesson that I don't think Nigel understands, that you clearly see in even the like spasmodic and halting efforts of the early Trump administration, is that big things are actually easier than small things. Because if you it's like a grasping the nettle kind of thing. If you're like tentative about it and evasive, and like, you'll seem weak. And basically the situation Nigel is in is that he basically has had a monopoly for quite some time on being an alternative to this system. And that monopoly position has allowed him to sort of play the middle in a way, and like work really hard at being like marginally acceptable to the system, and like, getting huge wins, which turned out to not be wins at all, like Brexit. And, he's sort of been a player in this field, and now it's like actually, somebody's coming much harder than him. And it's sort of not someone who, it's like people compare, Rupert Lowe, for example, to Nick Griffin. Is Nick Griffin still alive? Is he still?
He's the BNP guy. I think so. I don't know, but like, he's not Nick Griffin.
He's not Nick Griffin. No. For one thing, he doesn't have a glass eye. But but in other ways, also, he is not Nick Griffin, right? And that feeling of, substance there is like very well communicated, and people are like, somebody on the Twitter was like, well, we showed pictures of Rupert Lowe to Englishmen, and 90% of them had no idea who he was. And I'm like, all right, well, once 90% of an Englishman have seen him, how much more popular do you think he's gonna be?
Yeah.
Right. And,
well, look, the Twitter test is interesting because like, oh, it's only Twitter people who know him, but he has his posts are the most viral of any politician in government. And they're like, oh, well, this is Elon Musk boosting him. It's like, no, this is his genuine popularity in the online audience. And that's going to spread out. Whether he can build enough of a big tent, I don't know. But like, there is demand for it.
And certainly his staffers are seem like very serious people too.
Yeah.
And the like, they're, the English young right is in many ways more impressive than the American young right, which I might have said to you before, but like, it's very, very true. And
it's more, there's how do I put it? Like, when you compare, say, a Charlie Downs with a Nick Fuentes is like an entertainer. Yeah. Charlie Downs is just mission driven.
Yeah, there's actually there's a living tradition of statesmanship there, whereas actually for Americans, for at least from my perspective, it's much more like resurrecting a dead tradition. And that's sort of what makes me a neo-reactionary, not a reactionary. I'm not like directly connected to this historical tradition. I just like, it's like Michelangelo, and the people who did the Renaissance basically observed that like that the art of antiquity was actually just much better than anything that they could do themselves. And they're like, we are just going to learn from the past, but there isn't like a continuous stream of teachers that, connects Praxiteles to Michelangelo or anything. It's like entirely died out. And here it is not quite entirely died out. And this is the thing that I notice, I'm going to Austria and then Germany next. And this is the thing that I notice in Europe, and it's different in every European country, is that old traditions have not entirely died out. And whereas there's no old right in America.
It's like a little brother, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like a little brother.
And so actually being in the role of actually the little brother, which was the role of America for the whole 19th century, of course, is like, it's actually it's fitting, I think, in a way. It's like, actually, you're just like, no, this is a really impressive bunch of young people, and they should have a country to run.
Yeah, but there's also another interesting comparison. I watched Marco Rubio's speech the other day, and I thought it was very good. But that is almost like the son coming to tell the dad, like, you need
No,
to get your
Marco.
shit together.
Yeah, no. I thought it was let's talk about Rubio's speech.
You weren't a fan.
Do I have?
We got 5-10 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. So here's my perspective in a way. It's that basically I'm not a fan, and let me tell you that sort of the reason why the difference between the Rubio speech and the Vance speech a year ago, which might seem like very similar speeches, were actually quite different. And the result of the Vance speech in the audience was people basically felt like their mother had just died. And with Rubio, they stood up and clapped. Okay, why? What is the difference there? And basically, as soon as you see your enemies clapping for something that you did, you should be very, very afraid because maybe they know something you don't. What actually was done there is basically, in a way, it's a victory for the neocon wing rather than the isolationist wing of the administration, to the extent that there is even an isolationist wing. And here's why they clapped. What Rubio accomplished there was very similar to the amazing transformation that the American empire, which had just spent the last 4 to 6 years, depending on your timing, in 1945, fighting for a progressive world empire called the United Nations, in which Stalin would be our strong right hand. And then they realized that this was not going to happen and that Stalin actually did not want to be their little buddy, and which they had thought for the whole war. And they never saw him as a peer. And then he's like, yeah, fuck you, and they're like, oh shit, we thought we were playing him, but we actually were getting played. Right. And that made them very pissed at Stalin. And that allowed them to come home and present themselves to the American people as staunch anti-communists. And these were actually the people that had been the strongest allies of Stalin 5 years before. Right. And not even allies of Stalin that had been using Stalin, for purposes of world domination, basically. And when they realized that they could basically retool this whole anti-Hitler machine into an anti-Stalin machine, and when they realized that they could basically do this incredible Orwellian switch where we were now fighting our biggest ally, or sort of semi-fighting our biggest ally in this strange way that made no sense at all, they were just like, all right, our thing lives. And basically the reason why the people in Munich clapped at that speech is they were like, Rubio comes in and he's like, Vance comes in and he basically undermines the institutions. And he's like, do we even need this? I don't know. Do you need it? Nobody needs it. Right. And, he made these people feel not needed. He undermined. Rubio comes in and he's like, I challenge you to stand up for Western civilization, and et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, Western civilization.
Yeah, but
and
hold on.
and wait. And what they realize is that they can come home and basically be like, we're for Western civilization. We're standing up against communism, and then they just quickly do. They're like, well, the real Western civilization is diversity.
See, my read was like they all got so embarrassed with Vance, like they was like, I can't believe he said this. Everyone was like, yeah, but he was right. And
Rubio comes in, and the first thing he does in his speech is he basically celebrates the founding miracle of this whole world. He's basically like, I'm not going to call you quislings. I'm not going to say, I'm going to call you allies. I'm not going to, the amount of real undermining that could be done just by saying, hey guys, the EU is just the Western version of the Warsaw Pact, right? You could rip. What Vance did was incredibly gentle. They would be crying, they would be vomiting, right? They would see their lives flash before their eyes because they would realize that they were about to suffer the fate of Ceausescu, right? And essentially what he's saying to them is, you're not going to get Ceausescu. We're not going to pull the rug. And we are going to participate in this same Reagan type game where basically we are going to support the shitlib leaders of Europe and of Canada and of Australia and New Zealand. We are going to support them by opposing them and letting them feel like, oh, I'm the real nationalist. I'm standing up for Europe in the face of this. We disagree about Western civilization. We think Western civilization means diversity and homosexuality, and we're going to stand by that. Right. And all around, it's Trump managed a 40-point swing in the Canadian election. Do you know this? Like the liberals were about to be wiped out. Trump comes in, he's like, we're going to have a trade war with, Canada or whatever. And now the conservatives in Canada they're not great, right? But still, basically, you're sort of scoring an own goal, because what you're doing there is you're basically saying you're participating in the kayfabe. You're not breaking the frame. So essentially, when Reagan comes out and is anti-communist, basically all of Europe being like all Euro-communists or whatever, basically they're like, this is great for our narrative. We get to play against Reagan. We get to explain to our core support base of European shitlib aristocrats that we are here protecting you from Reagan. And when Trump comes out with his Greenland thing, it's like, same thing. It's like basically, oh, we'll protect you from the big bag Americans. We're standing up for you. It's funny because you have these two kinds of nationalism in Europe. You have for example, the nationalism of the Scottish National Party, and the nationalism of the British National Party or the English Defense League, or wow, these are two very different kinds of nationalism that appear superficially to be the same thing. Catalan nationalism versus Spanish nationalism. Wow, these things are actually opposites. And so what you're doing when you basically, the Greenland thing is straightforward conversion of foreign policy into domestic propaganda. He's like, I am standing up to this, I'm here for America's interests. We're going to get Greenland. We need Greenland for the rare earths. Mining under ice is fucking possible. Right. Greenland is an icy desert full of welfare Indians. Right. Basically, and any bases that you needed, the Danes would give you. So you're basically just picking a fight with these shitlib Europeans in a way that actually they love. I think he also swung the Danish election this way. And so actually, when, for example, state proposes to fund the AfD, or let's say Trump comes out and funds Restore UK. Is that good for Restore UK?
No.
Fuck no. Right? Fuck no. Right? And the thing is that basically, unfortunately, the reality of American politics is American voters cannot possibly understand that. And because American voters cannot possibly understand that, you win votes in America by doing something that is counterproductive for your overall ideological goals, right? And you're winning. Yes, you're sort of winning in a way, but you're winning in this kind of sugar high way where, everybody's going to forget about Greenland by next week, right? But you've permanently damaged your public diplomacy efforts in Europe. Right, with this retardation, and I think the tragedy there is that I really do think that foreign policy has to be used as domestic policy, but there's this just grand move that you can pull where you basically tell all of Europe Vance times 20, and you're just Germany, love you, Germany, but do I care what kind of government you have? No. I don't, actually. We don't care at all. You could be communist. You could be Nazi. You could be some kind of hippie thing. We don't care. We could, and by the way, hey, Germany, not only are we closing our bases because we don't need them, they're to protect you or something from Putin, not a big deal, whatever. We're closing our bases, and we're actually also withdrawing all our diplomats from Berlin because all they were doing was interfering in your domestic politics, which we don't care about anymore. And if we have something to say to you, well, we'll email, but if it's complicated, we might have to Zoom, and that would be that is the exact opposite of funding the AfD. And that would be the AfD's basically wet dream. right? And
Right,
moreover,
Yeah.
if you do that, and if you do that to all of Europe, now not all of Europe may sort of take this opportunity, but like you're creating all kinds of interesting possibilities, and those possibilities will eventually reflect back into American politics. For example, if as happened with Gorbachev, if the French are just like, you know what, we're kind of done with this shit lib thing, and we're going to make France again, you know, and like Americans see that and they're like, wow, they could just do that. I mean, already in a way, even Bukele in like the shittiest little country, he's had a huge impact on Latin American politics, and he's had some impact on North American politics.
Yeah,
right?
and even Hungary and Poland here.
Yeah, right. But the thing is, actually, if you're even Hungary and Poland here to some extent, because they haven't even though the shit libs took back Poland, they still have not quite yet managed to fill it with Angolans, you know. And so here are these countries that you can go to that don't have this problem. And what does it cost on Ryanair? £39?
Yeah, something like that.
You know, and like you can see this alternate world where, you know, like it's not a thing, right? And so the more of that you see, what really happened in the fall of the Soviet Union was that Gorbachev, not with any plan to he let the Allies fall first, right? You know, and the Allies fall first, and basically you have this whole narrative of like international socialist brotherhood, right? And it's like, oh wait, it wasn't socialist brotherhood at all. Actually, it was just a stupid little empire from 1945, right? And it looks like actually they don't really like socialism very much in Czechoslovakia, you know?
Yeah, okay.
And that's something that you can do that actually is like, it's a slower circuit, but the level of effect that it has on domestic politics is titanic, because you basically, so much of international politics is like legitimization. Like, you know, in the 60s, basically, you know, the libs would be like, oh, we have to do this thing, this like civil rights thing, because otherwise the new countries of Africa will outvote us in the UN General Assembly. And people like swallowed this. They believed it like unconditionally, right? Yes, the UN General Assembly, very important. We can't lose votes in the UN General Assembly. You know, in the early 70s or late 60s, I think, there was Arthur Goldberg, who was a Supreme Court justice appointed by Lyndon Johnson. He actually steps down from the Supreme Court to a more important position of ambassador to the United Nations. You're just like, wow, you can't even imagine that world, right? And just like watching that dream fall apart, like, you know, I would think it would be wonderful if Trump is just like, hey, you know what? You know, people talk about Turtle Island, you know, let's talk about Turtle Bay, you know, because that's some really nice real estate. So if you want to have a United Nations, hey, rest of the world, go ahead and do that. But like, we're just not going to do this anymore, right? You know?
Yeah.
And like, and actually that feeling of like, you know, you're gaining support by showing strength, and you're showing strength by just shoving over these moribund institutions, which used to be like pillars of like the narrative, and now just would like fall over without a trace. I mean, you know, and
I'm gonna have to get in the car, and I'm gonna rewatch both now.
both
Vance and Marco Rubio, because I was like, oh,
yeah, because he's saying it's brilliant. You'll see people, I mean, internet Nazis loved Rubio's speech, and you're just like, actually, no, like, you don't see what he's doing here.
Right, I'm going to watch both again. I'm conscious of your time. You got to go to the next thing. Fuck, we could have done another 3 hours.
I was good.
When are you back next?
It was good.
Am I going to see you in Vegas?
Wait, Vegas? Yeah,
I want to see you in Vegas.
Yeah, can we record in Vegas?
Of course we can record in Vegas.
Do they have studios there?
We'll just find a studio. Of course we'll find a studio.
All right.
Curtis, thank you.
All right, great
Thank you everyone for
pleasure
listening.
as always.
See you soon.
See you soon.